without that pattern of events, without that stadium, I think where would City be? They would have survived. I'm sure they would have survived because there's too much support and weaker clubs than City have survived. But I think we would have been in the sort of situation that Everton find themselves in. Very much still the second club of their city, still a great club with a great history and a wonderful support, but struggling, really struggling.
As promised, here is part 3 of my interview with David Bernstein, the former Manchester City chairman, who was in charge of the club, guided the club, you might say, between late 1990s and early 2000s. City, of course, were promoted from the third division, the third tier anyway, of English football via that playoff final against Gillingham in 1999. And of course, Joe Royle was the manager at that particular time. Under David Bernstein, Kevin Keegan was also the manager. So lots to talk about in this third and final part. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching.
As chairman, we were virtually at the same time we appointed Joe Royle. So I didn't really inherit anybody. Joe Royle was appointed just before I became chairman, but with my agreement. And I was very pleased to see Joe on board. And my relationship with Joe was a very warm and very close one. So something that I treasure. And I think those first 2 or 3 years with Joe were the best years I had in sport, let alone at City.
And yeah, of course, they included relegation to the third tier of English football, which we City fans painfully remember that season down in the third tier, the playoff final, and everybody, we're now at 25 years since that happened as we're speaking now, and there will be dinners. I'm hosting a dinner, for example, with some of the people who played in that game to commemorate, that story. And even now, with all the success that City have had, if you ask City fans of a certain age, they will say that the playoff final in 1999 was still the most significant game and possibly even, the club-saving game. You were chairman, and so you can tell us exactly the scenario. If City hadn't got promoted that day through that playoff final, would this club still exist?
Yes, I'm sure it would exist, yes, but it wouldn't have existed in its present form. I agree with the views that was the most important game in the club's history. The goals at the end from Kevin Horlock and Paul Dickon were the most important goals that were scored, and the reasons for that are pretty obvious. We started this program of change. We made a lot of tough decisions, a lot of, I thought, very good things, and of course the start of that season didn't go very well. In spite of everything, we were struggling a bit until Christmas, when we beat Stoke City, and that began the turnaround. But we've been too far behind in the table to get into the automatic playoff places. But we beat Wigan in the playoff semi-final, and the Gillingham match was just extraordinarily important for a whole load of reasons. One of which was that had we not won that and got promoted, I'm doubtful whether the new stadium deal would ever have happened, because we had to illustrate, I think, to the City Council, who've been very, very generous with us, and Sport England, that we could actually achieve sporting success and begin to show a scenario which would justify our being in a new stadium. So when we were 2-0 down with a minute to go, I looked at that giant scoreboard at Wembley. I thought, my goodness me, what are we going to do now? This is going to be the first season in the second division wasn't too bad because it was a novelty and we were doing okay. But the second season would be really, really hard. And of course, to win the match from that situation was a bit of a football miracle. And certainly, I've never quite recovered from it. I've never, no other sports event now can get to me like that they did 25 years ago. It was, sitting there as a fan would have been extraordinary. Sitting there as chairman of the club and going through that was something I will never forget.
I wonder what your blood pressure would have been like.
I shudder to think.
Obviously, the club turned at that point and started to climb again under your stewardship, under the guidance of Joe Royle, and then subsequent managers that came along, the club climbed back to the Premier League. You must feel very proud to have played some part in the turning of this enormous ship around.
Well, absolutely. That's really why I've written the book. That's what the book is about. Is this turnaround, and the work we did in the second season, the season we got promoted to the Premier League, was also fantastic. It was a more, in a sense, a slightly more comfortable season. We did well right through the year, and in the end, we didn't need playoffs or anything, but we did need this dramatic game at Blackburn, the last game of the season, which wasn't quite at the level of Gillingham, but nevertheless, it was pretty close. I'm sure all the fans you speak about will remember it vividly. And I remember when it finished, saying to Laishi, you remember Laishi, who did Laishi, I said, get back to Manchester and get a big party organised at the Midland Hotel. And I banned the drinking of champagne at the club until we had something really to celebrate. Because when we had gone down under the previous regime, we've been relegated to the second level of English football. They drank champagne afterwards, and I was very, very upset about that. So I banned champagne, one of the many symbolic things that we did to show that we were serious about what we were doing. But that evening, when we got back to the Premier League, we had plenty of champagne. It was fabulous.
You've mentioned that obviously Joe Royle was your favourite manager, or at least that's what I'm taking from what you said. And you've also mentioned that Kevin Keegan you had, let's say, ups and downs with. So was that the most fractious relationship you had with the manager?
Well, yeah, I mean, I only had two managers in my time there, which I was very pleased at, because City had 5 managers in 1 year at one time. So we got away from all that. But yes, the relationship with Kevin was up and down. I think that's the nature of the man. He's very passionate. He demands a lot, and that was fine with me. And we knew about that when we took him on. But those demands became, I thought, unreasonable and dangerous for the club, and it sort of culminated in the Robbie Fowler. The beginning of Robbie Fowler, which I was very nervous about because of his injury record at that stage, and I have to say I was proved correct as time went by. Kevin wanted to, as he put it, go through the front door, chairman, and put a cheque on the table and get him. And he initially wanted to pay £13 million, which in those days, for a club with no money, very little money, was a lot of money. I believe we could have got him on a pay-for-play basis, because Leeds were desperate to offload him. And given what I said about his medical records, I thought we could get him on that basis, which would have been okay. But this is where the difficulties arose, and some of my colleagues began to support Kevin and take what I thought was an unrealistic view. And in the end, I think we paid £6 million for him, which I thought was not necessary. It's a wrong way to do business.
We'll just take a little break, more from David Bernstein in a second, just to thank Counting King, who are experts in financial advice, loans, R&D tax credits. That's research and development. They're based in Salford Quays. Look them up. They're a brilliant organisation. If you run a business or involved in a business that can benefit from their resolve in trying to sort your problems out or trying to help you, then look them up on the internet and get in contact with them and tell them that Forever Blue sent you. And also a big thank you to Eamar Development UK for their support in the videos that I do. Back now to David Bernstein. At the end of your time, and the reason why you left the chairmanship was because things became a little bit uncomfortable or fractured again behind the scenes. Can you give us an insight into how that went and why it happened?
Well, I think the whole Keegan scenario was very, very important, because, as I say, that led to the board sort of, in a sense, breaking up a bit into, you've got to support Kevin under any circumstances, against my view that we had to maintain proper, basic, sensible thinking. I also wanted to reorganise the team, the top team, and certain tensions arose about the appointments of Alistair McIntosh and Chris Bird, how the jobs they would have, and so on. My views and the views of some of my colleagues, again, were different, and that gave rise to some tension. So 2 or 3 different things arose at about the same time, which contributed in the end to my saying, no, enough is enough. This is not going to work the way it had been working, all the way that it was a big commitment. I mean, I was living in the south. I was coming up to Manchester normally twice a week for a couple of days during the week, and then for matches or follow the team wherever they were. So, and it was a commitment I loved. It was no hardship. But funny enough, right at the end, I began to think, oh, this is a long way to go. I began the thought of going up to meet, to board meetings and things. The pleasure started to just disappear, and that was one of the reasons I thought to myself that this is the right time for you to go.
So when you look back now on your time at City, do you have any regrets? Did you make any mistakes?
Well, we all make mistakes, of course. But I think maybe what happened was sort of maybe nearly inevitable in a way. I look back and think could have I done things a bit differently in the last part and avoided it, and maybe so. But I think to keep a group of people like we had together with a manager who was of the nature of Kevin, and to keep all that really tightened together became almost mission impossible. And I think even if I try to handle it differently, it may have ended up with the same sort of conclusion. So no, I've got no real regrets about it. I had 10 years on the board and 5 years as chair, and it was a tumultuous period. There was never sort of a placid period. Rather, we were on the up most of the time, except for the one season when we weren't. And it was a fabulous experience, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything. It was a lifetime highlight for sure.
I'm guessing that the proudest thing really would be managing the transition from Main Road, the beloved Main Road, into this new home. I mean, that's part of your legacy, isn't it?
Well, thank you. I think it is. I think we had one way we had a strong hand to play, and on the other hand, it was a very weak hand. But we recognised that the City Council and Sport England wanted a permanent stadium for the Commonwealth Games, and that the only tenants really were ourselves, for Manchester City. So we took a very strong negotiating stance. We said it has to be a blue stadium. It has to be fit for our fans. It can't have a running track left afterwards. It has to be a specialist football stadium. We'll only pay so much towards it because, frankly, we can't afford to pay any more, etc., etc. So we negotiated, I think, the deal for stadium in football. And I remember once going to a match at Newcastle when Sir John Hall was chair, and him coming up to me in their boardroom and saying, "Hey, David, there's something funny going on in Manchester. I don't know what it is, but just being amazed that we could somehow work out such a favourable deal for the club, but we did, and there was nothing funny going on. It was just decent negotiation, and I must say, with great help from the City Council, from Sir Howard Bernstein, and Sport England as well. We all wanted the same thing, and we did it with a very small team. Looking back, I can't believe we had a handful of people doing all this, and Alistair McIntosh played a very big role in dealing with the stadium. He was very, very good indeed.
You mentioned Newcastle, and history tells us, or certainly the urban myth, and you can maybe tell us if it's different, if you have any insight, that actually the Sheikh or even Taksim before that saw the advantage of the new stadium, and obviously in the Sheikh's case, sole ownership rather than shareholding has been one of the big attractions of buying Manchester City, as opposed to Newcastle, who were in the stadium was in the middle of a city centre, didn't have the land around it to develop. And now we're seeing, of course, Corp Live and whatever else is built on that piece of land. So the stadium has been crucial, hasn't it, to where we are today.
Absolutely. That's how. So we go back to the importance of the Gillingham match and so on. That without that pattern of events, without that stadium, I think where would City be? They would have survived. I'm sure they would have survived because there's too much support and weaker clubs than City have survived. But I think we would have been in the sort of situation that Everton find themselves in. Very much still the second club of their city, still a great club with a great history and a wonderful support, but struggling, really struggling to survive with maybe different owners and a lack of stability. They've lacked Everton. Everton are just an example of a club, as Newcastle were until recently. Obviously, their fortunes have improved now. So, yeah, I think history would have been very different without that stadium.